Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Ed Hand, your host for tonight's Unpublished TV panel discussion. Our topic tonight, the return to class for post-secondary students in COVID. However you're watching and listening to our show, whether through our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, or on our podcast channels, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and more, I'd like to remind you can still cast your vote on this topic at unpublished.vote and then email your MP to tell them why. Our question this week is, if returning college and university students will be learning predominantly online, should tuition be reduced? At unpublished.vote, you will find our podcast on this issue, as well as articles, opinion pieces, and research on the various plans to return to class. So let's get started. And joining us this evening, Gillian Phillips is the past president of the Ontario Confederation of University Faculty Associations and currently associate professor at Nipissing University in North Bay. Rewat Dianandan is a professor of epidemiology at the University of Ottawa. Nicole Brianis is the national deputy chairperson of the Canadian Federation of Students, and Brenda Austin-Smith is the president of the Canadian Association of University Teachers, as well as a professor at the University of Manitoba. And our question, the results come back, 68.8% said yes, tuition should be lowered. Just under 19% said no, and 12.5% unsure. Nicole, you must be encouraged that at least two-thirds feel that way?
Definitely. And, financial situation has been extremely difficult for students even before the pandemic began. This is nothing new. There's simply more attention on it now about the struggles that students face in being able to pursue education. But when we talk about tuition, yes, it's important for institutions to be looking at their budgets and seeing how they can reduce that, such as through ancillary fees in order to support students. But ultimately, this comes back to a larger systemic issue, in that there's not enough public funding into post-secondary education. It's been decreasing throughout the years. And this is something that needs to be changed and needs to be addressed not only now during the pandemic, but afterwards as well, moving forward and supporting students throughout post-secondary education.
So this isn't just about the tuition fees being too high. This is just, you want to see a complete change to the whole education system, would you not?
Definitely. And when we look at international students too, who are currently used to be to foot the bill for education, because there is not that public investment from the government into post-secondary institutions. These are students now, when we're moving online, are still paying tens of thousands of dollars for the same education that domestic students are facing. However, they're doing that from a computer, some in their own countries even, or being forced to pay for rent and for fees to stay on residences here without receiving the same supports and without having the same access to the education that they should have and should not be paying even more for.
Gillian, what communication was there between the Confederation and the province in reopening?
In terms of OCUFA, I'll say the province has been very reluctant to really offer any guidance or advice. What they have as the support has been very minimal, and they've been very active on the public education front, but universities really haven't had much engagement at all from the province. And I think, just to echo some of the things Nicole was saying, that, one of the things that we're really seeing here is the results of years of underfunding of the Ontario post-secondary system, where, in Ontario, our tuition rates are much, much too high. And students are bearing a much too high cost of supporting that system, and that's also coupled with when the Ford government came into power, they gutted some of the reforms that the Liberal government had made to OSAP, which had made tuition grants quite widely available to students in low and middle income brackets, and made that tuition more affordable. And that's been really, really scaled back. And so students are on the hook, and they're looking at just punishing debt loads, and I think all faculty are really sympathetic with that. You're facing no education or a crushing debt when you graduate. And so for all of those reasons, I think it's really important that we consider that reducing tuition. However, I will also say, and I think this is in Nicole's thinking as well, that we can't just cut tuition. Universities can't simply cut tuition. They need that revenue somewhere, and so the government needs to bring funding in to support that that reduction. And I'll also add that faculty are working really, really hard right now to make this fall semester as good as it can be under the circumstances, and to offer high quality education. And I know they'll be able to do that. But I do understand that they're very difficult economic circumstances that most students find themselves in.
Now, Ray, you're going to be teaching online this fall at the University of Ottawa. Most of the University of Ottawa is going to be online. Do teachers feel comfortable with remote learning?
First of all, I'm on parental leave, so I'm not teaching this year.
Okay.
I wish I were. I wish I were, because I'm actually a big champion of online learning. And in my faculty and in my school, that's been something we've resisted to a large extent. The professors in general don't feel comfortable. And it's hard to teach certain topics online, like statistics, for example, that requires a whiteboard to mark on and to be able to peer over people's desks to see if they're doing the math right, or laboratory courses where you have to actually do physical things like mixing chemicals. So in the sciences, we have a specific set of challenges. Not to say that the arts don't have the same or different challenges. Everyone's different. But to answer your question, professors in general do not feel well prepared for this. And we've only had a few months to prepare, and that's not enough time for a dramatic paradigm shift with insufficient resources thrown into it.
Now, in terms of the teaching online, and you mentioned some stuff can be taught, some can't. For the stuff that can be taught online, and that that's not as tactile as some of the other things, do you consider the quality of online to be the same as being in class?
I assume that question's for me.
Yeah.
It can be. It can be the same. It's just different. It's a different modality of learning, and it's not for everyone. It's actually preferable for some students, and just anathema to others, depending upon their learning style. I'm a big fan of deploying a variety of options for learning for students, in addition to the in-person variety. So even before this pandemic, we had a big push on to create online courses. I had to record a special video that we produced at high expense to convince incoming students to take my online class, to convince them that it has certain qualities that you cannot get in person. But the in-person has certain qualities you cannot get online. So as a standalone service, it is insufficient, but it is an addition to another set of larger educational services we should be offering.
Brenda, what's been the approach in Manitoba to reopening colleges and universities for the fall?
Well, in Manitoba, we're one of the provinces in which most of the colleges and universities are online. At least my university is completely online for the first term. We have, I should say, not quite completely, but mostly online. About 55% of colleges and universities across the country actually are virtual, right? We have a couple of exceptions, and those have to do with the kinds of instructional needs that Raywat was alluding to. We have, for example, some introductory courses in theater that are being conducted in an online situation with physical distancing in place, the use of clear masks so people can see each other speak and do accent corrections when they're rehearsing for different roles, that kind of thing. And we probably also are going to see a few labs, some bench science go forward with some very small labs, so many more distributed, smaller groups of people mixing their chemicals, and perhaps some nursing classes. I was talking to somebody who was kind of musing over how to teach nurses how to insert a catheter online. So there are some things that do require not just dexterity, but they're responsive instructional moments in which you have to interact with another person in order to adjust your style of interaction, medicine, dentistry, nursing, these kinds of things, to a patient or to somebody for whom you're providing a kind of physical service, and it's the response of the person that guides you. So I'd say in Manitoba, most of it is virtual. And again, as people have observed, it's the situation we're in right now is involuntary. And that's what makes it the most challenging. Online education has an important place to play in the post-secondary education sector. It's the fact that in mid-March, we all pivoted instantly, whether we liked it or not, whether students liked it or not, whether their families liked it or not, whether our communities wanted to or not. So it's the involuntary nature of this that came as such a shock. It also will come perhaps as a surprise to some people to learn that online education done well, high quality online instruction, is actually really expensive. It takes a lot of resources. You need a lot of IT support. So there's a resource draw that, again, our universities and colleges were not necessarily prepared for. So the call for lower tuition, I think, is absolutely spot on. But as Gillian says, it's not a matter of just wiping out that income stream from universities and colleges. This is an opportunity for the federal government to step up and begin to take steps to actually, I think, put in place the equivalent of the Healthcare Act, but for post-secondary education.
Nicole, let's get back to you. A case of COVID on campus at Carleton University here in Ottawa today, 5 at Western University in London. Are student concerns about cleaning and health being addressed clearly by colleges and universities?
So return to campus has definitely been a scary topic of conversation for both students and workers. And students are concerned about the folks who are there to take care of them on their campuses as well, and ensuring that both faculty as well as facility workers on their campuses are being protected. I think it's been complicated because there hasn't been very steady streams of communication that students have been experiencing from their institutions. And that's where that barrier and that fear is largely coming from as well, and the misunderstanding about how individuals should be interacting on their campus. So I think that moving forward, there really does need to be consultation that's taking place between workers, students, and the administration to ensure that every single person on that campus is feeling safe and is being protected. And moving forward, there does need to be a more open stream of communication to make sure that everybody is able to be present on campus and being engaging in the ways that they need to be.
Gillian, I'm curious, colleges, do you think they're going to get a dramatic drop of enrollment for this fall and probably next year as well? When you see, in particular with college, it's more a hands-on approach to training, to training in particular for trades. So I'm kind of wondering, are we expecting a big drop?
Well, I don't speak for the college sector, so it's hard it's hard for me to say. And also, we actually don't even know what our enrollments are going to look like in the university sector this fall either. I mean, there's kind of early numbers that suggest that domestic enrollments are quite good. They're quite healthy. International students, as Nicole alluded to earlier, probably not. So that will be interesting. I think it's my impression, and now this is totally anecdotal because this is from me as a parent because I have a child in the college system. But it seems that colleges are doing an awful lot of work to put the programs in some online and some in person and some blended, so that they can do as much of that kind of hands-on work as they can. And I know the kinds of things that Brenda was talking about, so those like labs and those in-person things that you can only do, skills acquisition in person. I think the colleges are working really hard to kind of trying to find their way around so that they can have as much space on campus to do that safely. But it's going to take the entire fall for us really to understand, like probably till November, to really get a sense of what the enrollment numbers are going to be like this year.
Ray, some schools are going to be offering up to 70% of their classes in person, and 4 of them are in Atlantic Canada. Now, there's been a lot of focus on the Atlantic bubble. Now, is this where we see the bubble works or not?
Whoa, that's a difficult question. If anyone can do it, they can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This disease is not the same across the country. It has different characteristics and manifestations depending upon the region. It varies with population density, with a history of disease in that area, with a variety of other factors, especially right now, travel. So the extent to which international travel is colonizing and seeding new cases here in central Canada is problematic. They haven't got the same issues in Atlantic Canada. So 70%, I didn't realize it was as high as 70%. I think if they are using the right strategies, like using fully their distancing protocols and mask wearing and avoiding those classes that require touching and intimate association, then they've got a chance. What you can't control for is the extracurricular activities. Are students gathering to study in large groups afterwards? Are there pubs involved? Are there house parties? That's the kind of thing I think that will really drive the epidemic in the campus situation. Not so much the classes, even though classes are quote unquote dangerous, relatively speaking. But given Atlantic Canada's low initial prevalence, the risk is obviously much lower. But again, it's these other activities that threaten super spreading events. You gave me a difficult question. I have no obvious answer except to say, I hope they get through it.
No, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think we're going to, part of the problem is, Ontario's got a certain issue. Quebec's got an issue right now. Atlantic Canada, not so much. And maybe that's the problem is, we're trying to get a blanket way of just opening up these schools, but you can't because you've got these outbreaks here and there, yet some others are good. How do you deal with that, Ray?
Well, a heterogeneous disease requires a heterogeneous response. Every region is going to be different. And the most important factor is what is the caseload in the community? If your caseload is extremely low, you have more options. If it's extremely high, you have almost no options. I personally would like to err on the side of overprotection. So you don't need to be in person for most classes. I don't fully understand why they're choosing to be in person. I'm sure they have their reasons. So, your question was, how do you manage the multiplicity of manifestations across the country? You do it with a multiplicity of different strategies, and importantly, a fallback position. What is their plan if and when their strategy fails? Are they ready to pivot to fully online in a week's notice? That's unclear.
Okay.
If I could add on to that quickly too. So in relation to how students are able to engage with their education, as well as even for professors or course instructors who are having to work from home, a huge component is access to Wi-Fi. And the reality is that for many students in rural communities or from low-income families, that's just not simply accessible. And that's really needs to be something that's addressed beyond tuition and all those extra fees that are now a requirement in order to even pursue your education that really need to be explored and be supported in accessing this.
Good point. Very good point.
But I jump in too
Sure.
at this point and just say I'm from originally Atlantic Canada, so I know many of these small universities that you're referring to, and they are often in semi-rural areas, as Nicole points out, where access is an issue. They're also in small towns that pretty well are really dependent on the business that these students bring in. So there's a little bit of that going on too. What does a small school offer that a big school doesn't? Exactly the kind of intimacy, small class sizes. So they have a bit of an advantage. I think in Nova Scotia, there's one active case of COVID right now. After the outbreak at Northwoods, a long-term care home in Halifax was brought under control. The caseload rapidly dropped. So I think what you're seeing is small towns, small universities, already lower student populations, right? 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, far easier to manage. And I think the administrations and probably the towns are taking a bit of a risk, but they're trying to make it work. But I'd also add, these are also the small towns in which we see contract academic staff, people who teach at more than one university at the same time, moving from place to place to place to place. And those are the people, those are the academic staff who are exposed to more dangers and more risk. If you are in Halifax and you're teaching at 3 different institutions trying to make a living because you don't earn enough money as a contract academic, then you have very little choice but to put yourself on kind of the instructional equivalent of the front line.
It's like the PSW situation here with long-term care in Ontario.
It's analogous, yes.
Yeah. Now, Brenda, I was going to ask you as well with the return to class and the impact of COVID. What's been the impact on research being done by university professors?
Oh, it has just been devastating because of the necessity for everybody to switch immediately to teaching themselves how to teach online. And there were more resources available in the summer, at least to some people, but it was very difficult to manage. And the interim, like that, the end of the spring term usually offers people an opportunity to delve into research. That's where people go on site visits. If they have archaeological digs, they go to field research. If they're biologists, wildlife biologists, they go to archives in different countries. If they're historians and literary scholars, and all that was shut down. You couldn't fly, you couldn't travel, you couldn't get access, and you had to set everything aside in order to become a better teacher, a functional teacher in this online environment. And what we saw was academic research kind of stopped, and publications, at least for most women in the academy, also stopped. A few people were able to keep the research up, but they had other advantages going for them, perhaps, to start with. But research has really ground to a halt. So that traditional 3 to 4 month area in which people conduct their researchers, collect their data, go into public schools, for example, and collect data on children. All of that was shut down. So we're going to see those effects into the fall. And though people might not realize it, a lot of those effects have to do with the pandemic itself. That is, people conducting medical research, sociological research, psychological research into the effects of the pandemic, the effects of isolation, gerontology, right, pediatrics. All of these researchers are going to be affected by this.
Gillian, I'm going to ask you, and this is not only as an associate professor, but you also had mentioned that you have a child in college. So I'm asking you, as a parent, dorm life, any concerns?
Well, my daughter is because her program is entirely online, is staying home.
Okay.
So, and the dorms are open where she's going, and the dorms are open at Nipissing as well for students who choose to study online at school. And I think, I think in terms of the health concerns, for all the reasons that everybody has mentioned, that, the dorm life is probably the riskiest kind of space for spreading COVID, for sure. But on the other hand, I think we're also really concerned about young folks who are, kind of ready to start their lives and embark on this new kind of phase of their development, not being able to do that, not being able to kind of, go ahead and have that kind of transitional space between being, fully on their own and being at home. And so what I'm finding really interesting through just observing my own kids is the way that they are taking some of the skills that they have and using them to kind of substitute for the kinds of things that they would normally be doing in dorm life. So they're using all their social media skills to make friends and get connected and set up study groups and, do all those kinds of, then create online social events and all of that kind of stuff. So they're doing their best. But I think there's a real risk and also a real loss that we're seeing for those young folks, for sure. Yeah.
Now, Nicole, international students, and you had mentioned it back at the beginning of the show, how much they actually pay to come here. $21 billion for the economy in 2018. What dilemma are these students dealing with? Because obviously they were represented by you as well, right?
Yes, it's scary and it's hard for these students. They've been explicitly excluded from any type of financial support that's been made available from the federal government. So in addition to paying those extremely high, ridiculous tuition fees, they have had no financial support other than the fact that certain students who do work in the essential fields were permitted to work 20 hours a week because that was something that Canada needed, not that it was a benefit to the student in that way at all. So when we're talking about, as you said, $21 billion to the Canadian economy, this isn't simply through tuition. These students contribute through housing, they contribute through taxes that they pay, and every single time, that they do work as well, they're paying taxes. So they do deserve the support that domestic students have been receiving, and that's simply not been there. And students are calling for this inclusion when they are asking for the federal government to continue to provide financial supports. But beyond that too, the students who are here still, because they haven't been able to go home with COVID, or who are, now trying to navigate studying from their home countries in courses that are here, there's serious mental health concerns that are going to come along with that as well in terms of the isolation that's being experienced. And that's a concern across the board, but especially for these students who are here in a different country trying to navigate these spaces, and now are being told that they're not able to engage or make friends in the same ways that they could before. These are very serious issues, and what universities and colleges really need to be investigating is what types of mental health supports are available, not only through online, but through phone networks for students who are unable to access internet, those hours that the campuses are closed. Where are students going to go when they need to submit assignments or when they need to do their studying? There's so many tiered layers of concern that exist and that really need to be addressed and considered.
And I'm wondering, from your perspective with the Canadian Federation of Students, are you getting any calls, any inquiries from international students, whether they can get into the country or not? I'm not sure if coming to school is necessarily considered essential by the government.
Yeah, it's been confusing. That's something that we're still trying to figure out a little bit too. Again, it depends on the institution about whether students are able to study internationally or not. Not every single institution has made that allowable. And it's really dependent on what's allowable by the country. And I know visas have been very backed up for students who are trying to apply, whether that is to go home or I'm assuming that it would be the same for coming back here. So I'm not exactly sure on that answer, but I do know for folks that I have been able to talk to that it's been a serious struggle.
Ray, I'm wondering if this provides an opportunity for post-secondary education. The word we've been using since March is pivot. But, when we're looking at so much teaching that'll be online, virtual, whatever you want to call it, universities, colleges just might not need all that property, all that space, all that anything, right? Are you seeing, looking big picture here, big sky, are you seeing some way of changing education, post-secondary education here?
Not just education. Look, there's an old adage, the Chinese say that crisis and opportunity are the same word. I don't know if that's true. Crisis-tunity, I don't know. But the pandemic is a crisis that is presenting a variety of opportunities for rethinking how we do things. At the secondary level, for example, there's no reason that school has to start the first week of September. Why do we assume that's the case? The pandemic gives us an opportunity to rethink when we start and how we start and the hours that we offer and things like that, right? How we deploy healthcare, long-term care centers. All these are now in jeopardy and their weaknesses are being shown. Pandemics have a way of exacerbating the inequalities in society and in prizing forth the truth of our nature, our frailties and our strengths. So what it's doing for post-secondary education is revealing for us our strengths. Our strengths are passionate individuals, committed teachers, the content that we offer, all that wonderful stuff, and the weaknesses. And the weaknesses are overexpensive infrastructure, our unused and underused infrastructure. And you're right. I think that's always been the threat with online learning before the pandemic, is that increasingly universities will push it as an option to reduce costs in the long term and take away our offices, for example. I hear that all the time from my colleagues. But I think it might just happen now. I think they're going to grow up and realize, we actually don't need to offer a lot of this stuff. A lot of it can be automated. Some of that's good and some of it's bad. Right? The good is, I don't want to have office hours in person anymore. I want to do it by video conference and I'll leave my house for the 2 students that show up. The bad is, they're going to be disadvantaging a lot of people as we've noticed here. So we'll see what happens. We're in a whole new era now, and nothing will ever be the same again.
There we are. Brenda, what do you think? Big sky vision there of education. Do you see it changing permanently?
Not necessarily. I think there always will be and should be choice, and the choice needs to be driven in consultation with the content experts, and they're our members. So I'd say we know from surveying members, we have a crowdsourced survey on the caut.ca website that talks about the effects of COVID on the academic staff. We also have a really interesting chart of different institutions and whether or not they're moving partly online, blended learning, all in person. I think what will happen is it's going to be uneven, and it should be uneven. As Raywat points out, there are inequities now. Those inequities will be even more apparent. What we need is a post-secondary education system that's publicly funded. It's not a commodity. It serves the public good, and it does that in the most flexible and compassionate way possible, with the academic mission and the academics at its core. Because wherever you have academics and students, that's where the university is.
Well, I want to thank all our guests on Unpublished TV this evening. Gillian Phillips is the past president of the OC UFA. Raywat Dianandan, professor epidemiology at the University of Ottawa. Nicole Brianis is the national deputy chair of the Canadian Federation of Students. Brenda Austin Smith, president of the Canadian Association of University Teachers as well, professor at the University of Manitoba. And coming up on our next Unpublished TV, we'll take a look at when and if the Canada-U.S. border should reopen for non-essential travel. Thanks a lot for watching Unpublished TV. You know what they think. Stay safe. I'm Ed Hand.